Hi, everyone. Welcome to Unfiltered, the podcast dedicated to the progression of the fluid power and automation industries. I'm Megan Cook, that's Alan Burdett, and today it is our pleasure to welcome Mr. Wayne Houston to our studio. Hi, Wayne.
How are you, Megan? And old man Alan?
Very well.
Besides old, I'm okay, Wayne.
That's it.
Thanks.
Well,
So, Wayne, tell
yes.
us, always the first question here. How did you get into the fluid power industry?
Well, it's an interesting story. In 69, I graduated from college with a degree in forestry, was getting drafted, was getting ready to get married, and had no job. And I got a chance to work for a company called Livingston and Haven, which was in the fluid power market in Charleston, South Carolina. The owner of the company called me in and said, Wayne, in 7 years, you're going to be vested. And I'm thinking, I don't even know what the word vested means, and I sure won't be here 7 years. That was 55 years ago, and a lot has changed in those numbers of years. In that era, the
Time flies when you're
technology,
having fun.
listen, it was an education. Back in then, your education was a station wagon, a box of catalogs, and don't show up until you get rid of all the catalogs. But I learned very quickly that we are not in the product business of selling. We're in the systems work of selling. The first accounts that I had success in was forestry. And the reason being is that I had a degree in forestry and I knew the language of that industry. And so in talking to people, it was not talking about a pump. It was talking about how do we make that grapple better? How do we able to pull out of the woods faster? But it took a few years before I realized actually what that really meant. The coat and tie that we wore back in 69 and 70s was not necessary because invariably you're talking to an engineer that also had to fix the machine. When somebody had a problem on the floor, he had to go out there. When I go out there with a coat and tie on, I look like a freak of nature. Plus, I couldn't climb into the machine. So very quickly, I figured khaki pants and a blue shirt would get you in there because I realized that in our business of working with an OEM, which is what I predominantly did for all these years, mobile OEMs, is there times that you need to climb on the machine and pick up that crescent wrench and turn a bolt. And so it got away from the dress. And also I learned the language. You have to know, if you're talking to a forester, you have to know how to fell a tree and a chainsaw, but that's part of our business. As I have gone up through the years, whether it was coal mines, drilling equipment, it was always to know their language, be part of the team. Today, I think so oftentimes we learn by reading a book. In that era, you were the expert, even though you weren't. You knew how to put that gear pump on there and that valve and knew that you're going to have heat and all of this other problems that come about with ineffective systems. But it was a way of learning a product and learning the customer because what we brought more to the customer than a product was a new approach to a machine. For 55 years, I've never worked a day. It's been fun, been frustrating at times, but I've enjoyed it from day one. That's why it was 79 when I decided to retire, not 65. Of course, I didn't save my money anyway, so I couldn't retire, but it's been a great career, really interesting. So
The changes over that period of time have to be off the charts, I would imagine.
well, just think though, Megan, back then it was just gear equipment. I remember the first John Deere excavator I saw. There were 7 pumps on it, just a line of gear pumps. Every function had its own pump, its own valve. There was no open center valves. There was one for one. It's a very efficient machine. Every component controlled its flow and pressures and temperatures. Whereas today, if you remember the first time they upgraded and they put a load sense system on, they had one pump and went to a variety of systems. You had a high delta P. You brought on, not only did you need a bigger engine, you need a much larger cooler because we were splitting oil with the delta Ps and it made a big difference. So as we have gone into technology, I think one of the biggest questions we've had to address was that of filtration. First time we put piston pumps underground, if you know, coal dust is black, right? So you try to clean off a tank to put in new oil, that coal dust just goes right in. Well, for the gear equipment, they accepted the life they got. When we put piston pumps on there, it lasted about a half a shift. That coal dust just wiped them out. And for a while there, I thought we were going to be in the parts business. It looked great. First order for parts was $1 million, the biggest order we had ever seen in our life for parts. About the time they placed the order, the mines decided they didn't want any piston pumps anymore. So they went back to the gear pumps. But what we've learned, as you can know, is that even with gear pumps, which they thought would take any kind of contamination, when you improve the filtration, they get a longer life. So, it's been a learning curve for 55 years. And now we're seeing that it's not just in the iron, because iron hasn't changed a whole lot. I mean, piston pumps may get a different control here or there, or pressures ratings may go up, motors may get different controls. But yet the contamination that was there years ago, we know how to address. Sophistication in controls is where we're headed. We need the electronic controls, because just think we had to put flow controls and orifices and needle valves and all of that in a system to make it work in how we wanted it to work. But today with electronics, you do the program and it's all right there, very efficient. But when it fails, you have to push that tractor off the middle of the interstate, and it gets people kind of upset. That's been one of the changes too. We have to know how to work on the systems. So
I think
it's been a lot of changes.
I think part of the, you were talking about the gear pump stacks, part of it was, of course, getting people to come around to accept, getting the OEMs to come around to accept that, you could replace a bunch of that with a single pump. And that took some doing too. So anyway, I got a question for you here. There's a lot of skills required in the fluid power industry. And what do you think is the most underrated skill in the fluid power industry?
Well, I think they're kind of all related, but there's several. I think the skill of listening. We come in with a predetermined solution. Really, one of the early questions is, have you tried this before? What have you done in the past? There have been times I've tried to put in a closed loop where the customer's tried it in the past, and he wanted to stay with an open loop system for the control aspect. Well, because of controls, because of electronics, today, how we used to approach things can be different, but it's always important to understand the customer and how he feels about it and address it that way. The other thing I think that we don't really consider as important as it should is that people don't care what you know until they know that you care. Until you're really part of their team and caring for them, trying to drive in the car and come back and say to Franklin Equipment, I've been thinking about this skidder. Have you ever thought of doing this? It would be so neat. And walk him through. I used a term years ago, and I don't know if it's a viable term today, but is Imagineering. Imagine what it could do if we did this. And years ago, it was so exciting because things didn't cost as much, and people would be more excited about doing it, and you'd work through it together on a handshake. Today, you wouldn't even leave the room and get a cup of coffee. On a handshake, you'd have to have a piece of paper with your name written on it. It's that's been a big change.
And a visitor's badge.
Right. And learn from those you can rely on. I think so oftentimes we rely on people and just take their knowledge and take them in and let them be the man bird and repeat what they say. But when we can rely on them and learn from them, I never wanted a serviceman to go in to make a call without me. Not that I wanted to protect my customer from what he may say or do. I wanted to learn from him, because this business at one point was very dependent upon the salesman. I mean, think about it. Back then, we were the hydraulic guy. The customer didn't know about it. His machine could be no better than what I knew. That's pretty scary, isn't it? I mean, today I go in with these young men that know their controls, and I'm just flabbergasted on how good they can do it. But I think that if we rely on other people and not afraid who can get the credit, we can be far ahead on the design in our systems and customers.
Speaking of customers, Wayne, so thinking about initiating a new project, what do you wish customers brought to the table earlier in a project?
Well, one of the things that I have always strived to learn was, now remember, most of my life has been with OEMs, so they're selling their product to someone, is I've never wanted to be more technical than their customer has the ability to maintain. Otherwise, I'm the one getting the call. So just, it goes back to what I said earlier. Knowing the accounts is very important. The OEM, what is his skill? And don't let him get enamored with technology and put that on the machine before it can be accepted by the customer. So asking those kind of questions, I wish they would tell me that. I wish they would tell me, especially as we go into technology today, what kind of money you want him to spend, because which direction we go is very dependent upon what he can spend, but also what his customer will buy. It doesn't do any good to put high tech on a machine. The guy wants a hand valve and a gear pump. So that's
Yeah.
always an important knowledge to pick up. I always like
Yeah.
to know the market size. You talk about that. And I think, COVID, when deliveries, well, we had a lot of times where you couldn't get deliveries, but knowing how the market works, the size of it, because we've had to plan ahead so much with fluid powered manufacturing, has just never been, always on the shelf like it used to be in the early days. And I like to find out if this is a existing machine that we're upgrading or a clean piece of paper. All that kind of determines on what direction you go as far as design.
Well, something that's sort of related to that, Wayne. Megan asked what you wish they'd bring to the table earlier. My question is, where do projects typically break down in your experience?
Well, when you get away from the John Deeres and the Caterpillars of the world who put prototypes out and they let them sit for a year and just see how they hold up, and then they bring them back in and analyze what's the weak points. The typical Southern OEM, the first challenge is it starts up. That's always a positive. And if it moves and gets up on the trailer, they've already sold 10 long before it ever gets to the woods. And, knowing how it's going to hold up, because it always seems like there's times to fix it than it is to get it right on the front end. So I wish that we could have more of a time of testing the machine without being in front of the customer. Does that somewhat
So
answer
longer
your
test
question?
cycle. Yeah. So you're saying a longer test cycle then. Don't make the prototype production unit 1. Yeah.
As soon as the paint dries, they're building another one. So yes.
Wayne, what piece of advice would you give someone entering the fluid power industry today?
I would listen to those people who've had the experience with the machine, setting them up, testing them, testing reliability, understanding what the customers want, rather than reading a book. I think today we have it so easy to, whether it be the computer, AI, whatever, that designs can be made without us knowing a thing about it. I think so important. That's what we bring to the table as a distributor, is that we can tell how we look at problems, and be prepared for that. And so listen to these older guys. And sad thing is we have an industry that's retiring. My generation was right after World War II, basically coming into play. And we went through the rough times when the gear pumps were very inefficient. Just it was there. They leaked like a sieve. We didn't need to put a lubrication system on. It never rusted. You had so much leakage. But listen to what
Self-lubricating.
the old guys have to say and use that experience.
So let me ask you this. There's expectations and there's reality. Where do you think the gap between sales promises and technical reality still show up?
I think on the front end, we need to understand the application. I think we need to know the capabilities of our componentry, because as you well know, that the ratings at times you read about in a catalog are the extremes. It doesn't necessarily mean you get the life. And I think as we design, sometimes if we're pushed against the wall with cost, that we try to kind of hedge and get a lighter component than needed. So it's really, I think, the integrity that we have as a salesperson, that, our word is our bond, that we'll do what we say. And if it does fail, we got to live up with it, accept it. We've never, as a company, backed down when we screwed up. We learned from it. We were talking earlier, failures don't scare me. Machines that work right out of the box do, because I don't know how close I am to failing. And so when it fails, I know how to increase the longevity of it, what components to check. And I think customers accept that. You can give a price on the front end and they're saying, I can't handle that. And the end, after you go with a light duty component, you end up spending the same amount of money, but they accept it because they worked on it themselves. It's a challenge of matching what we know we should do and what the customer really wants, and us trying to convince that relationship we have with them that this is the right way to go.
Okay, last question, Wayne. So, what is one question that you think customers should ask, but they rarely do ask?
Some of your questions are really hard. I think it goes back to integrity, is us understanding what the customer wants, because really he has an idea what he wants. That's his question is, can you do it? And you say yes, then you've got to do it. We got to at times swallow our pride when we see that I need some help. In the early days, it's funny, and kind of maybe this will tell you this answer. I know this is rabbit trail, but I thought to be the expert on everything was what's so important. I never wanted to say, I don't know. I don't know. I always wanted to be the one that has the answer. So therefore, I avoided at times bringing a Lindy in. I wanted to be able to know that pump as well as they did. But as I found out that the more we got into a machine, when you're selling a flow control or a filter, it doesn't leave you sitting on the side of the road. The hydrostat will. So they want to see that not only do you know, but you got the backing of a factory behind you. So the question being asked, will this work? I've got to be honest at times and say, I don't know. I'm hoping it will, but we will stand behind it and I'll get the right people in to make it work. It will work in the end, but
Yeah, good answer.
it's been a fascinating journey in an industry that has changed so much in our short lifetime. It's getting more and more technical. The price of efficiency is improved filtration and cooling. And as we go into the electronic world, all of a sudden we need to know duty cycles, which in the early days, you just put a bigger horsepower engine on it. You didn't care. If it heated up, you put a larger cooler on. All those are the ways we covered up the Band-Aids. Today, with the electronics, we've got to be dead on to get the battery life we want. And it's an interesting career to see equipment change and get better. There you go.
It is. There's a lot of fun stuff out there. It's changing back from, I don't know, you were talking about handing out catalogs and then going to systems approach. And then, I think that's what customers want now. Again, Wayne, I mean, they want integrators. They want the salesperson to know what they're talking about. Doesn't have to be 100%. They have an engineering group behind them, but it is not walking in with a line card saying, what do you
Yeah.
want to buy today? Right?
Right.
It's a full-on systems approach. And the distributors that are really making headway there are those that are integrators
Yep.
that have adept sales guys that know what they're talking about.
Exactly. Years ago, we didn't know what a customer did. You see a sign, you pull in the parking lot, unless they had equipment out back, you didn't know. And you had a receptionist there that are non-existent today, and you could ask, who do I talk to? What do y'all do? Was one of the early questions. And then you try to formulate what you can talk about. But today we know. Today we know how to make machines better. Today we know where shortcomings have been on equipment design. And we try to address that in a way that the customer makes it sellable. Unless whatever we do is sellable, it doesn't matter. It could be the best one machine in the world. We don't make any money. You make money when there's multiple machines. And so you want to make sure it's sellable to his customer. And that's where a lot of times talking to young guys who are just enthusiastic about technology. Whereas as we get older, the enthusiasm is, we designed this machine. Is it sellable? Can it make a difference in the marketplace? And I think we have a bunch of neat distributors in this country. And as you have talked about so often on your interviews, you see the electrification, controls, all is the big difference anymore. I mean, you can't get in a tractor. It doesn't look like an airplane with all the buttons and switches to switch in there and safety and margin. It's just neat the way we have equipment today. You almost dumbed them down so you don't have to know how to plow a road. The machine knows how to do it. You just have to steer it. Anyway.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Well, hey, Wayne, we appreciate your time. It was great
Well,
having you on here.
I appreciate you letting me share my story and a story of an industry that is changing.
Yes, very interesting. Thanks, Wayne.
Thank you very much.